So, welcome back to another casual podcast where we don't do anything professional here. I want to introduce you guys to Rachel right here. I'll let her give her own introduction, but I asked this like really broad question on Instagram yesterday or the day before, and not to be devil's advocate, just to like generally have a conversation about it. And Rachel was like the only one that responded with like a pretty level-headed level-headed response that wasn't like inciting debate, like actually open to have a conversation. So I was like, hey, you want to be on my podcast? And it was that quick. So Rachel, I'll let you give like an intro to however you want to introduce yourself and do your thing.
Yeah, I mentioned to you a bit ago, it's my first time doing a podcast, or any kind of conversation like this. But yeah, I'm from Smith County. My experience is in nonprofit, public agency work. And what prompted me to answer your question is I've had some experience in domestic violence and just women's studies and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was nice to have that conversation with you.
So like this type of stuff, does it fall under like your category of work, or is it kind of like it's always variables that get brought in like that in conversation, obviously, right?
Yeah. I think the intersection of it is what always brings these topics into it. So I don't do anything specifically with, I guess I don't even know if there's a career path of toxicity, but
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too. It's
yeah,
like under the
yeah,
umbrella of like trying to analyze
right,
people who don't act right and trying to make sense of like the root of where these things stem from, right? I would assume. At least that's how I look at
yeah,
it. Okay.
yeah.
So like the specific question, just so you guys don't know, was I guess it's not so much a question, but there is a question behind it because I do wonder why. Um, I was curious about figuring out like the utility or the like optimal use of like putting the gender narrative behind like toxicity. So like categorizing it with toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. And like the responses I got back, people were explaining to me the definitions, and like I kind of generally like understand like the ballpark of like the few main definitions that people like use, but mine was more so why. So like again, I'm not trying to debate at all. So like, what would your definition of it be? And you don't, if it's not super specific, that's okay too. Just
Mm-hmm.
broad. How would you
Yeah.
categorize it?
So I think the basis for me is that there are oppressed groups. We talked about the LGBTQ plus groups. We talked about women in general, and I think, or even people of color. And um, I think that categorizing toxic masculinity is important because throughout history, the male group, and specifically the white male groups, have been the ones that do the oppressing. So I think that's like the basis for me.
Yeah. I think there's some for sure things that like, I agree. Like there's undeniable reoccurring instances where you have a very particular group of people who have done things to other people who are almost non-debatable. Like it's undeniable how bad they were, right? It's like whether we can go to
Mm-hmm.
slavery. There's some very obvious things that we could point to, right? Like slavery, stuff that happens today that is almost too
Mm-hmm.
apparent to deny. The part for me is like that I keep trying to wrap my head around, because I don't mind like categorizing people like that. That's not like some people think it's like an attack on like men. They're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like do you think that like you're just saying that men are bad and we got to fix ourselves? Like I don't think it's like that at all. I think of it more like there's a problem, right, which we could all agree on,
Mm-hmm.
and there's problems that come from men, and I wonder if it's like a good idea to use the gender narrative as a premise rather than acknowledge it as a variable. And like
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it's both, and because without naming it, we can't find who's perpetuating it. We can't find where the solutions could come from.
definitely,
So I think maybe it's a little bit of both.
it definitely could be. Like I get my head, like I get in like some neurotic state where I'm just like, okay, like if I and this was what one of my friends on Facebook was telling me. He was like, if you overanalyze it, you're basically going to just be looking for little symptoms of things, you're not really going to address like the big problem overall, you know? But like there's a lot of parts with it where it's like, I'm not denying that there are parts of masculinity that have manifested themselves in very negative ways throughout history, right? Or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I think of like that application of thought that I put on it, I'm like, man, I don't look at like Islam, for example. I have a lot of Muslim friends. I don't look at the negatives that have been manifested themselves through Islam and be like, this is, you know, toxic Muslim. You know what I mean? I don't categorize some name to
Yeah.
it. And I'm not trying to use that because
Mm-hmm.
obviously gender and religion are very two different things socially, right? And the way that things
Mm-hmm.
are constructed throughout those systems. But it's hard for me to like figure out the gender thing because I just think like if you had people, if you had like stuff, we laid it all on the table and you said, okay, I'm not going to tell you anything about this person. I'm not going to tell you their name, their age, where they're from, nothing. I'm just going to give you a list of their behaviors. The gender thing, like it's undeniable that certain things come from men, certain things come from women, but I don't need the gender narratives to tell me something on the table is bad. Does that make
It's
sense?
bad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where it leads me to the
Yeah.
question, like to where I'm like, why are we using them? Not necessarily, is it optimal? Is it not optimal? If it's not optimal, then that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. I can get it. We can still use it. But I think like, why are we using those then?
Um, I think it's because it helps. I think I mentioned it before. I think it's we categorize things so that we can figure out again where the issues are and how I mentioned to you in the messages that their genders and people go through different experiences, and it's the case for and I can only speak for men and women right now because of course everything's in learning process. But I think that if you, not all masculinity is toxic, like you mentioned, but there are instances of toxic masculinity, and to find those solutions, the learning has to continue. And I think that pointing it out will help realize where it's become toxic, whether it's through policy, whether it's through, politics you mentioned, whether it's through family life and just general quality of life. I think it's important to know that, instances of toxic masculinity lead to different forms of oppression.
Do you think that like, so let me ask you about this because this is like the definition. I've asked a lot of people and I'm trying to wrap my heads
Mm-hmm.
around like a way that it makes sense for me. So and I've come down to like two different things. If like I were to accept that like, not accept it as a label, but accept it as like a specific premise, which I don't yet. I'm not saying that I do
Mm-hmm.
or don't. I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
I'm in limbo. So, but I've come to
Yeah.
two definitions of it, and I'm just like, okay, it's either there's masculinity in like any system that has flaws. Nothing is an absolute. So there are things inside masculinity that we've constructed that are bad, right? That we can agree on. Those are not virtuous. Or the other definition that I've come to is that masculinity, like anything else, with an overabundance of it, can lead to negative things like oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And I float between those two things. And the reason I know that seems like it's like kind of like semantics. It's kind of like, well, if it's bad, it's bad. But the reason I have to think
Mm-hmm.
about that is it because like, are we addressing specific problems that we can all agree on? Or is it one of these things where we're trying to meet like a particular threshold and be like, we got to start defining what being a man is and not letting that go overboard? Does that make any sense or no?
Mm,
Or
yeah.
maybe we get too neurotic about it.
Yeah. No, yeah. But then I feel like that kind of begs
It does
would
beg the question. It does.
lead me to, yeah, it would lead me to think that masculinity is bad in itself. It can get bad, but I don't know. I think labeling a form of masculinity and realizing that, okay, I mean, it's things like 1 in 4 women deal with domestic violence on some level, and that's just the reported numbers. And that's not including like marital rape. That's not including, I don't know, just numbers that don't report. So I don't know. I think that by learning from the mistakes and from the horror that has happened through history and saying like toxic masculinity is bad, and these are symptoms of it, and these are reasons why I think is important in helping us again find those solutions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you think that like some of these solutions are like, okay, so there is like, this is how I think of it. There's some things that I like when you said earlier, like it begs the question, like, is masculinity inherently bad? Like, I don't think that like
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't trying to beg that question, but I know that it does. But the way that I think of it personally
Mm-hmm.
is that like I don't know if it's that I'm saying it's inherently bad. I think of everything many times like a multidimensional scale. Like if it leans one
Right.
way, it's gonna get really bad. But it's always balanced, right? At least that's the way that it makes sense
Right.
to me. So it's not necessarily that like something like masculinity is bad. It's just more like if it gets too
Yeah.
lopsided, it can get very bad, right? So it's like it's good for men or women to be strong, but if they get too strong, they start drinking their own Kool-Aid, and that ego starts inflating that side of the scale, and it gets very
Mm-hmm.
heavy. Then stuff can get pretty bad, right? We've seen it happen throughout history.
Yeah.
Um, when I start thinking about that, like it always brings me back. Like, is it more ego than it is gender? And is the ego manifesting itself differently through genders? And if the root of it is the ego, like,
Yeah.
is it
But
really a
is
gender
ego
problem?
bad?
I don't think ego is bad. I just think like, so this is how
Yeah.
I think of it, right? I think you need ego.
Right.
It's a great thing, but it's just like anything else. Like I think that something can,
Mm.
like jujitsu can be useful, but if you use jujitsu for the wrong things, it's going to be very bad, right? So it's like ego
Right.
is one of the things that keeps people moving forward. Just I think instinctually it does.
Mm-hmm.
I think of ego as like a non-binary thing because like I've had weird experiences with you drink a little bit of
Yeah.
lean, have a big old edible, and you have a little bit of ego death when you close your eyes, right? So I've had experiences like that where I'm like, okay, this like thing inside me, this ego, like I'm a male,
Mm-hmm.
but my ego inside me is non-binary. That's something completely different. And I think ego is at the root and manifests itself differently through men and women's
Right.
experiences of this toxic behavior. When I
Yeah.
think the root is, if the root is non-binary, then I kind of feel like, man, like, why am I stopping at the level of gender when assessing these behaviors, even though they manifest themselves differently? So, like the toxic behaviors, we're labeling the stuff that comes from a man as toxic masculinity, and the ones that come from women as toxic femininity. But like, I don't need those labels to tell me that they're coming from those genders. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make any
Mm-hmm.
sense? I know it sounds like
Yeah.
a rabbit hole.
No, it is, but I think I get what you're saying, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting it. But that was another thing you mentioned, is the non-binary being the root,
Exactly.
um, and and like I would like to think so, and I would like to think that gender is, I mean, gender is human-made, man-made, human-made,
Yeah.
and that's what I was trying to say in the messages, as limited as we are there, but that in an ideal world, everyone thinks that gender is whatever we want it to be. But I think because it's not, we have to admit that male female has been the ruling genders, and how we have dictated everything um, in life, and
Yeah.
from the men in the house, and men versus women in careers, and so forth. So that being human made, I think the imbalances that you're talking about that lead towards toxicity, I think it's justifiable for us to label them too, because we know where it's coming from, and we know what needs to be fixed too. But I think what you're saying, I think where it stops is that people get offended when they say, like, your toxic masculinity showing. I told people that
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you're like all of that, like you're being toxic, and it's an insult. And people don't want to go even past that, because like, okay, screw you, you're feminist that doesn't like anything and hates men. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
no, I think the basis of feminism, which is another word, is that it's equity versus equality, and I think toxicity falls into that in the way males have exercised their power over groups.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another rabbit hole. I don't even know if that made sense.
No, no, it makes sense sometimes. I like that you bring up the gender thing specifically, because obviously this is like we're having a conversation about gender narrative, but I like that you specifically bring up like the gender thing and how like it's a nat. So I believe that too. The gender is like made by people, but this is where
Hmm.
like, and not to make it politically, but let's just say it's not a political thing. But let's say there's two sides of the line.
You
There's
started
people.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. But I'm not going to use it in political terms. I'm going to say that there's two types of
Right.
people, right?
Okay.
Generally, stereotypically,
Okay.
there's people that believe gender was made by humans, and there's people that say no, it wasn't. But I think that generally they
Mm.
can agree. But this is how I think of it. I think that there's people on this side of the line that don't want to say gender was made by humans because when it comes to trying to like validate some type of thought, they're like, I want facts, I want data.
Right.
And then there's people on this side of the line
Hmm.
that are like, no, it's more of a truth. It's a truth. So I think that they're two
Hmm.
different things, right? If this makes sense. So let me explain my point. Is that um, I think that when people identify as any gender that might be separate from their body, I think that's a fundamental truth. I don't think that you can tell them that that's not true. Like I think truth and facts are different thing. Whereas like people that can't get certain things validated by facts, it's hard for them to wrap their head around a certain concept. So let me explain. Let me explain. So like if I tomorrow identified as like a woman, I'm a woman. Like no one can tell me that I'm not. Like I am. But the fact
Hmm.
is that like physically I'm not in a woman's body. So I think that both are true at the same time. But I don't necessarily but that's where the argument comes, right? They'd be like, Devon, you're a man. It's like, well,
Right.
physically, that's a fact.
Yeah.
But it's not the truth. And I think that there's
Right.
a disconnect right there when people having the conversation. They
Yeah.
want to argue it that and not, I don't know, move forward with whatever challenge might be at the table. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. That's where it stops. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I mean, that's the whole LGBTQ thing. It's the difference between gender and biological sex.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And with your anatomy is what you're born with, I guess.
So with that being said, okay, on the spectrum of gender, because it is a spectrum, and like with that being said, it literally could quite possibly be infinite. And I'm not saying that to be dismissive or downplay. I mean like I'm saying that with the utmost respect. It can be infinite
Hmm.
to some extent, right? And not even infinite, that's the wrong word, but you are who you are type of thing.
Choice. Right.
Yeah. So with that being said, when we look at toxicity, is it the use of it? It's hard to say. This is where I get around. I can accept this. I just
Hmm.
don't understand the gender narrative behind toxicity when the spectrum of it is truly by choice. Does that make sense? So it's like
Well,
because like
yeah.
if there's a trans woman, maybe she is more prone to acting a certain way because of her physical characteristics and the body that she was born into. So she exhibits traits of toxic masculinity more than the next woman who was born in a female body. But
Hmm.
it's hard for me to put the gender narrative on it because she's a woman. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes. And I think going back to the point that male female is dominated,
Hmm.
it um, I would say it's heavily dependent on how you're raised, like your society and community.
Yeah.
And I mean, this transgender person, if they were raised with these male, like masculine impacts, then yeah, that makes sense. But again, like I can't really speak to LGBTQ
Yeah.
community. So going back to like toxic masculinity as itself, uh, it's human made and culturally also, I would have to say. I mean, we could go back to how people are raised in their different cultures, like from Latinos to even Asian communities and especially American communities. And I think it comes from that rather than the biological I was born with a penis thing,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. 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 What do you think about like what do you think about, and you don't got to get into the politics of it, but like the extremes of both sides of conversations like this? Because like I think we could both agree that there's certain conversations that are not related to this topic, but the same groups of people argue for the same sides of conversations like this. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? Like there's some reoccurring events. What do you feel about people like not being able to have conversations? Because and you could be truthful and honest, I'm pretty down the middle again. You know what I mean? It's like, do you feel like people like do you feel like it's more heavy on one side that they don't want to have conversations? Because like if you talk to someone who's slightly more conservative, or maybe they're registered Republican, they're going to be like, nobody on the left wants to have a conversation. And if you talk to someone who might be
Mm-hmm.
lean a little bit more progressive, they're going to be like, nobody that's registered as a Republican wants to talk about anything. They just want to argue and debate. Do you feel like it leans on
Yeah,
one side more than the other, or do you feel like it's just generally people right now are so politically charged that they just
divisive. Yeah. I think I'm biased.
yeah.
I think I'm biased because I'm a little more progressive in some thoughts. But yeah, I don't think you mentioned we don't have to talk about politics. So I think it's more maybe the more traditional religions that are a little less tolerant of this fluidity that we've talked about. Like the conversation would have ended there.
Yeah.
Or I mean, but even on either side, I think there's just some things, like not even just now, there's some topics that are divisive, you know?
That's very true. That's very true. It's funny that you bring up the religion thing, 'cause not to go into religion, but like I've noticed this between both sides that
Yeah.
like the generally people who lean a little bit more left socially, they're like truth, 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 and like, but it's and that's more important than like, I don't want to say facts. I don't think facts are the most important thing in the world. They're really not. We don't. I think as humans we don't live our life based around facts. We just don't. Like, but it's more truth. Whereas like socially, the left is a little bit more about truth, but then on the right, socially, they're like facts, 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 facts. But then when it comes to like spirituality,
Mm,
sometimes the right is like, well, we don't need facts. It's more about truth.
mm,
And the left is
mhm,
like, well, you got to rationalize this for me a little bit. So it's funny how like they both think
mhm.
similarly. It's just they choose applications in different areas to use it. You know what I mean? So it's like if
Yeah.
the conversations are flipped, they both think the same way. It's just they're just picking and choosing how to be a little bit more heavy on the
I mean, we all
rationalization.
do that,
100%,
right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And then even with religion, like I consider myself to be religious, and I think when I say like the more traditional, like the things that I grew up hearing is that marriage is between a man and a woman,
Hmm.
and even women have a certain place in the house and things like that. So I think like that's a little bit of toxic masculinity showing, is that males generally saying where women belong and how they need to act and this and that.
Let me ask you about this then. Okay. So with gender roles, because I'm not like big into that. I was just like, I think people, whatever they want is whatever they want, and whether it's from a social construct or not, like if they want that and it makes them happy, I'm like, do it. That's cool. This is the part of me that, and this happens more on Twitter. I don't see this across other platforms so much, but on Twitter, there's big threads of like people just bashing the crap out of each other. So like,
Oh, I'm missing out.
yeah, no, seriously, I can send you some links of people just going in on each other. I just sit back and watch, but like there's like for example with gender norms, right, and like more traditional stuff, I feel like if there is a girl, regardless of the root, if she wants to stay home and have kids, like stereotypical,
Hmm.
right, stay home, have kids, not work, I'm like, if that's genuinely what she wants, like do it. That's cool, because I don't necessarily believe, because I
Yeah.
work for myself, I work with a lot of companies, like I know for a fact that your career and how much money you make in business is, it's definitely not something that should be put on a pedestal like a lot of people do.
Hmm.
But in the conversation between like females, I've noticed, and I don't mean that derogatory, I just mean like literally like women, females, girls, uh, they put that many times on a pedestal when they're comparing, like, well, do you want to be married and stay home and have kids, or do you want to go out and have a career? Your life is worth so much more than that. And I'm just like, I don't think it's a matter of like this is worth more than that. I just think that they're two different things, and like when you put one on a pedestal over the other one, stuff gets really weird for me. But I'm also not a girl, so
Hmm.
I don't know. So,
Well, it's true. I mean, you see it because you live in this heteronormative, like
uh,
gender norm world. I think without saying it, you see it. You see the toxic masculinity, I'm putting words in your mouth, come through, and but it's true, like because there's this Harvard study that you can go online and take it, and it's like implicit biases. Like it pretty much kind of tells you what you're biased towards. And to be honest, like I took it and I've been owning this and I've been working on it. I related women to home and males to work. And that was like my just implicit thing that I did. And whereas I try and live every day as, I'm just as hard of a worker. I, do this and do that. And, the whole feminist movement. But deep inside, I have this bias, and it's from growing up in a certain culture. It's from being surrounded by men who have laid the imbalance of masculinity, aka toxic masculinity,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Do you,
it's just perpetuated so deeply.
if a girl like really wants to, like, let's say she just wants to have a family, she just got that irk in her stomach. Do you feel like some of that is like beyond socially implemented, like over generations? Do you think that there's some people that like, and not even just, let's just say not even like just women, but like there are things that might fall into the stereotype of what being a man in America and being a woman in America is? And do you think that sometimes there's instances where they like genuinely feel compelled to do that in their heart? Or do you think that like
Oh yeah.
it always plays a factor? Because I think about that, like me, I'm like, the way that my dad raised me and everything like that, there's some things where I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, this 100% came from my dad. And I can recognize certain things
Hmm.
like that, whether it's toxic or not toxic. But then there's a lot of other things where I'm like, man, this is like just like really me, for better or for worse. And I need to work on it to keep it in check more than it's
Hmm.
probably like constructed through some like passing down of the torch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but do you think I mean, it doesn't even have to be just your father figure, the male in your life. Like,
It could be
it's
generations of
the
what we see on
society,
TV. And
right?
yeah, yeah. Like I grew up
Yeah,
watching Michael
yeah,
Jordan. That dude was like not like
right.
a normal person. Like I was an asshole and like
I've
terrible to
heard
people.
from the documentary. I haven't
Oh
seen it
yeah,
yet.
yeah. It's still good. You should watch it. It's pretty good. I think
uh,
for sure it comes from stuff like that. Yeah, but I don't know how much. It's hard for me
yeah.
to think about it sometimes.
What's a combination of it all? I think, and I don't. I hope that I didn't infer that staying at home and being a housewife
Yeah.
is wrong in any way, because I respect that. There's there's even people who would justifiably so have figured out, okay, how much would a housewife have to be paid living wage because of the amount of work she does, and it's like
Oh
almost
yeah.
200,000 because of the amount of stuff she does or they do. But yeah, and so going back to the masculinity, the toxic masculinity piece of it, I think I mentioned before, it's culture, it's society, it's media, and everything that we're connected to, especially, well, yeah, all our generations.
So like, um, also too, if like I'm keeping you on too long, because I don't know how long I'm going to keep you on. I'm not trying to keep you on for like 3 hours or nothing like that. But if
No.
you start getting close to a time, let me know. It's completely fine too. Um, so like I think about this sometimes for like evolutionary. I read a lot of like Carl Jung or Carl Jung, however you want to pronounce it. You know who that guy is? He's, yeah. So like I read a
Hmm.
lot of his,
Hmm.
and like it's interesting to start like pulling back layers of like the human psyche and whatnot, right? And trying to like, why do we relate this with
Hmm.
this thought and with the rabbit hole stuff? But I
Right.
think about this because I start thinking about for men and women both, and like just society as a whole, like how much is, not saying that we shouldn't always strive for progress, but like sometimes, not sometimes, just like the way that the human mind works, you have to, there has to be some like inevitable like danger just instinctually in us for us to keep trying to progress forward. And sometimes I think like what is the balance of that, you know what I mean? So like I think that it is good to address, like let's just say I start addressing toxic masculinity. I'm like, this is bad and it's real, but what is the ratio of it? How bad is it? And do sometimes people need stuff to overcome, like the way that like beyond gender, right? Like sometimes I think like Mexican people don't get, and I'm not saying this like this sounds like such like a, I'm not racist but statement. Like I promise it's not. But it's like my black friends and my friends who are just straight paisa from like Mexicali, they're both go through different things, but I can't say one is like oppressed more than the other. It's just it's almost not even comparable, right? But also at the same time, the way that these guys are and very very cool in a lot of ways would not have came if they did not go through some of this stuff. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight certain things, but to what extent is like could we ever look at some of this stuff and be like, man, this is
Yeah.
terrible, we should probably keep continuing to fighting it, but also it may pay dividends later on if sometimes we let some of these things run its course. I'm not saying that I think we should let things run its course, but I think about that sometimes. I'm like, man, like if we didn't let,
Mm-hmm.
like, for example, if let's just say we would have addressed like the police brutality thing, these white cops killing people for the last few decades, if we didn't address it, then like stuff would have gotten worse. But if we address it too much, and we believe this stuff is systemic and it's embedded in us from generations, I still don't think that the racism would have gone away. Is there a balance to where like it got to the point to where it's like these like it was the perfect ratio to have people be like, no, we're gonna riot in the streets and we're gonna make like this real big message. Does that make any sense? Like if you address it too much,
Yeah.
you're gonna suppress it, but it's not going away. It's just outwardly not going to be there, and
Mm-hmm.
it can manifest itself in other ways. But if you don't do it
Mm-hmm.
enough, it's going to run rampant. Do you feel like we might even be to a spot to where
Mm-hmm.
like maybe we're suppressing it enough? And I don't believe that. I'm just saying, like, do you ever think about that or no?
No.
Okay.
but I
Well,
get, but I see what you're saying. I see your point. So I think two things is that when you mentioned your different groups of friends, I think the intersectionality is important.
yeah,
Um, because of the different countries they have lived in, and just everything, like even the maybe generational wealth that may exist or not exist,
sure.
or the education opportunities and that kind of thing. So I think that's important to know, because you mentioned before it's multidimensional. I agree. There's so much nuance in all of this. But at the end of the day, oppression is oppression. And I don't think that any of us are in the position to say too much if we're battling this too much when it exists. And it might be the thing that I think too much is because people might be uncomfortable on different levels. But even to the point where now there's conversations going on about being actively anti-racist, that I don't know if you've heard this, but there's either you're anti-racist or just straight up racist. Like, you can't take the position of neutrality at this point anymore. You have to fight it, actively fight it
Yeah.
in whatever capacity you can. So I think that being active and doing what you can in whatever position you are to fight the oppression is important. And I don't know if there's ever too much.
No, I
Just not
100% get.
enough.
No, I agree. I
Mm-hmm.
100%. The reason I just asked that is because like it sounds stupid, but I'm just not like afraid because like I'm not afraid of looking like an idiot on the internet. Like I'm like people think things that are dumb and they just don't say them out loud. Like I'm at least I'm just being
Yeah,
honest. You know what I
we
mean?
all
Like,
do.
yeah, we all think dumb things.
No,
I'll just record it.
I admire that. I admire that, because I mean that's where the change happens, and that's where you could teach me or I could teach you, and we learn and move on. I think that's good.
So I say that because I've literally so like I think systemic racism is something that I feel like if I were to debate it, not debate the ratio of at which it happens, but I think just as a whole, I think it's kind of undeniable. I just don't know
Mm-hmm.
all the places it manifests itself because I don't have my hand in
Right.
every single pocket of what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But it's there.
Mm-hmm.
So from the other side of that, I genuinely honestly try to think about this sometimes, and it sounds so stupid, but I don't care if I sound stupid.
Say it.
I think about, I come from the perspective of like, is being a racist like really the worst thing to be in the country? And the reason I asked that was because I really thought about it. I'm like, is it the worst thing? Is it top
Mm-hmm.
five? Is it top three? And I came down to the conclusion like it's probably like top five. It's bad, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of it, but the reason I was thinking about that is because there's probably a lot of people that are like, be like, I don't hate black people, but in their heads they'll a bit like, oh, I do, feel a little bit different
It's
of
an
these.
implicit bias. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's people that will acknowledge that to be like, I'm not racist because I don't hate any black people, and I would never not hire somebody for being black. But let's say they go into a 7-Eleven at 11 p.m. because they're just trying to get a snack on their way home, and some black dude walks in, and they feel a little bit different, right? Like I think that's an example of
Mm-hmm.
racism. But it made me
Mm-hmm.
think about that. There's people that if they were to sit down and be honest, they would probably think that like, well, is being racist like really the worst thing in the world? It's like I'm kind of racist. Like I'm not like I don't hate nobody for their race, but I am a little bit
Right.
like against other Mexican
Mm-hmm.
people, against just what I'm not going to name stuff, right? Not
Yeah.
like I'm not
Yeah,
against nobody, but you know what I'm saying, right? Make jokes and
yeah,
things like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But I think about from that perspective because like it made me wonder like at the root of all this systemic racism again is I'm like, man, is like the root white supremacy or is it just like power in general? You know what I mean? Do you ever think about that or no?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I try to wrap
Yeah.
my head
And
around that.
I think it's both.
Mhm.
Uh um geez, you said so many things. I'm like
I know. So let's just, how about just the last statement, right? Like, I think I was leading up to that. Like, I'll just leave it. I talk
yeah.
way too much, Rachel. I apologize. I, um, I,
No, this is good.
I question that all the time. I'm like, is it white supremacy that is at the root of all this? Or is it just
Hmm.
power overall? And it's easier to manifest itself through white supremacy. You know what I mean? Like, kind of like, are they using the race
Yeah.
thing against us because it's a very, very viable application to execute? Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's both of those things. I think you're pointing out things that intersect. Um, yeah.
Like they have correlation. It's not necessarily the causation is one or
Right.
the other. Yeah.
Right. I think, and then just going back to, I mean, I think you mentioned this, like making jokes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I used to do that all the time, and I might still, and it's a form of racism, like these microaggressions. And I don't think of it as like, what are the top three worst things I can be, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
rather, it's bad. And even making these jokes in passing, we don't understand how it could affect someone. And if we let jokes pass, if we let just generalizations and negative stereotypes pass, then we're a part of the problem.
Do you feel like
And we are.
it's true? It's true. The problems wouldn't exist, but like I agree. We are part of the problem because that's what some people say. They're like, these problems were here before. I'm like, no, like the problems don't just you don't just walk into problems. Like
Right.
they kind of
Mhm.
they come from somewhere.
Yes.
Do you
Yeah.
feel like with the joke thing, like with your friends and stuff like that, like you don't make them. I make a lot of them with my friends, but that's because like my best friends
Mhm.
group is like the United Nations. It's like we're everybody in there, but like not an
Mhm.
excuse. But do you feel like motive has sometimes something to do with like that more than that's the phrases that you're saying? Because like microaggressions,
What?
I can definitely like
Uh-huh.
agree that there's definitely like I see those a lot just in general from
Mhm.
all over the place from people. But and
Mhm.
beyond race, right? But do you feel like motive has a lot more to do with like what comes out of your mouth than the words sometimes? So like my best friend, my brother, this guy's black and this guy makes more black jokes than I do. So then I get comfortable with it and I start making jokes to
Yeah.
him and we just end up going back and
Yeah.
forth and making fun of each other. Do you feel like there is,
Right.
and I won't take this as disrespect at all. Like if it's racist, if you feel like it's racist, then it's racist.
Right.
It is what it is.
Right.
Do you feel like motive has more to do with that behind what we're saying to each other than the words? You know, if it got out of that
Right.
conversation, it'd be a different story. But between us,
Mhm.
do you feel like
Right.
that's kind of benign or is it still kind of potentially bad?
I guess simply yes. But I mean, it just goes to show like how normalized these kinds of things are. We can say like the R word, and with like the mental health community, we can say, the jokes between your friends or even people I'm around. I hear it all the time, and I don't think it makes it right. And I think there is racism involved, but um, again, it just shows how normalized that is for us to make jokes.
Say that last part. Give me 1 second. 1 second. Are you there? Okay. Say that last part again because it cut off and I want to make sure you
Uh,
get everything that you're saying.
oh yeah, sorry, cut off. I guess it just shows how normalized racism has become in our society and our cultures. I'm going to say one thing: when all of this COVID stuff started happening, you hear all these things about Asian cultures and how the Chinese brought it over and things like that. There was a point one time where I made a joke and said, because I had really bad allergies. I'm not made for the Central Valley, and someone said, "Oh, like, are you not feeling well?" And I straight up said, like, "Oh no, don't worry, just because I'm Asian, I don't have this and that." And he made a joke about it, and that was just like 3 months ago, and I think I have accepted even before that it's like there's internal racism that happens, and like I shouldn't be joking about things like that, but it's like also normal in a way, in a very bad way.
Do you feel like
Yeah,
it's like self-deprecation in general is kind of bad? Because like I could understand the utility of using it towards someone else. That can get out of hand if you let it go. I guess self-deprecation
right.
too, but self-deprecation is a little bit
Hmm.
different. Like it's like you hear a lot of like my friends be like, "Oh, bro, like they'll make a joke and it's a stereotype, but it's in reference to their ethnicity or their gender,
Hmm.
more so
Or mental
ethnicity,
health, or like,
more so
yeah,
like I had a lot of my Assyrian friends be like, "Oh, bro, I'm Assyrian. All I drink is Pepsi." And I think of something like that.
hmm,
I feel like it's benign, but then like I can understand what you're
yeah,
saying. I just don't
yeah.
know. What do you think self-deprecation is part of that too, or it's just kind of like all bad and we're not going to be perfect, but we should put an effort to not do that as much.
Yeah, yeah, that too. I mean, it's in the word itself, like self-deprecating humor,
Yeah.
right? You make fun of, for women mainly, like your weight, or men too, like your weight and how you look, and things like that. It's not because you like those things about you, but because you were taught that they're negative things, but you make fun of it to cope with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's another whole other aspect
Yeah,
of
of course.
taking care of your mental health and your sanity. Yeah.
So with a lot of the stuff, do you feel like I want to okay, so you lean more progressive, right? Not right, but
Hmm.
I mean like progressive.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Yeah.
So do you feel like, because so there's a lot of people on both, like if I was talking to someone that leaned a little bit more right and they were a little bit more conservative, I'd ask them the same question so they can give people answers on the other side, right? Do you still feel like, because a
Hmm.
lot of people that lean more conservative would be like, okay, they just assume that everyone on the left side of the line typically they all just agree with everything with each other no matter what. And like they pretty much think
Hmm.
that everyone who's on the left side line kind of thinks alike for the most part about everything, which like obviously you're on that side of the
Hmm.
line because you kind of do. Everyone agrees about certain things. That's why people are on whatever side of the line that they're on, right, generally. But
Hmm.
like just
Hmm.
so people who are on the right more that may be watching this, there are things, and you'll got to name them, that you disagree with people on the right. It's not like it's just we're all tribal and we agree on everything just for
Yeah.
the left, right?
Hmm. Yeah. I think there's like some key things that people disagree on the other side, but I think there are levels, and a whole spectrum of our two-party system, and even outside of that within itself.
What do you think about, I'm not going to ask you about Biden. I was going to ask you about Biden, but I'm like, I don't know. If you feel weird talking about that, you don't have to talk about it. But you can give me a short answer. Do you
Uh-huh.
wish someone else was running in place of Biden?
I wasn't originally supporting Biden.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. That's a better way of putting it. It's a much more that's a much better way of putting it. I need to be more easing into statements like that because I would have been like, man, getting my whole opinion on Biden. I hate this guy. Who did
No,
you
that's
who did
what makes you you.
who did you want initially to be there if you would have had like your pick?
Um, I mean, everything was kind of up in the air before
Yeah, of
primaries,
course, of
right? So
course.
I was floating between like Sanders, and I loved Andrew Yang. I supported Warren. She was closer to the primaries. Yeah.
You feel like what do you feel like this was Bernie's chance? Like he's not gonna get another shot.
Poor old Uncle Bernie. He's like more Grandpa Bernie.
I
I don't
know.
know. But
That's
we're
what
all praying for him, like we do with like RBG and that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I'm just hoping that Yang makes a run for it next year. I feel like he's gonna be the youngest. I still don't think
You
he'll
think
win,
so?
but I want him to, but I don't think he will. What do you think about
You
Kanye
know what
running?
I think it is?
No,
Is
what's up?
people
What's up?
like aren't and I think it has to do with ethnicity too, though.
Yeah.
People aren't used to seeing, like, I mean, at the end of the day, we have two white guys running, you know, two old white guys. Yeah, I think that unfortunately had something to do with it.
Also, too, like, kind of just like anything else, where you vote does become a popularity contest. As much as like I hate it, but it's true. And I feel like if you look at somebody, a lot of people could agree with someone, but if they don't believe that they can actually beat the other person, it's kind of like, well, we can't vote for
Then
them.
they
You know what I
like,
mean?
mhm,
It's like people, a lot of
mhm,
people really like Bernie, right? A lot of people really do, but nobody believed that Bernie could win. And I don't want to say nobody, I mean the
mhm.
majority, right? Like the DNC, for example, they didn't believe Bernie could win. That's why he was not up there. So like that's what kind of sucks about it too. You hear some people that have some good ideas that really make you think about stuff, but they won't ever get picked
There's a
because
lot of there's a lot of stuff going on there.
yeah.
I don't even know.
Um, what do you think about Kanye running if he's really running? I don't think it's that serious,
I know,
but
right?
what do you have any thought on it? Because there's a lot people are going crazy over it. Some people are like, "This is
Mhm.
terrible. This is the worst thing of the world," and
Yeah.
I'm like, "Man, I don't know if you should take it that serious yet." If it turns into that, like yeah, like do your thing. But people are talking about like it's the end of the world right now. Some people, not everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's you surround yourself with similar circles, so that's all I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So
Do you feel
uh
like it's that serious?
I well, I think not him himself, but like that type of I don't know. I don't even know what to call it. That's
Like,
kind of undermining what,
yeah,
you know, the seriousness of the presidency and that kind of thing. So it just, with his background alone, I feel it's not as strong
yeah, yeah,
to, you know, be for the common good, which is supposed to be what the president's for.
yeah. I agree, 100%. I think that there's definitely. I don't think Kanye's gonna win. I could support this guy full heartedly knowing that he will not win. And like if it came down to it, I don't think I would vote for him. I'm not gonna lie, but I would support him up
Right.
until he drops out because he's forced. Because that guy will not, he will not make it that far. This is like some like theory that I think, and let me know what you think of this because it sounds crazy
Mm-hmm.
anyway. But I think about this, and I think of Kanye running. I don't want Trump to win. I just don't. I'm not a Trump guy. Um,
Right.
but this is what this is like my like weird long term investment game plan where I can think of like in a weird universe Kanye has like a crazy opportunity. So I feel like Kanye could pool some votes of people of color and make them swing votes. And I don't want Trump to win this election, right? But I feel like when people of color make themselves a true swing vote rather than just pick a particular side because that's what is in their community, I feel like that would make their vote stronger. Now, if that would mean that you sacrifice another 4 years of Trump being in office for the next two, three, four, 5 elections to be really decided by that people of color vote because they made themselves swing votes like historically at this, or like they're making the decision to kind of be in the middle and be like, hey, you have to work for our vote, like, you know, give us something to get behind. I feel like there could be a positive payoff to, I don't want to say Trump winning,
Mm,
but someone like
right.
Kanye coming in
In
and
terms
pulling
of the
people's votes and
presidency.
saying like, hey, we're going to put these down in the middle, like pull
Yeah.
us. Does that make any sense or no?
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think that part is true, that people of color and the young people are such a huge voting bloc that if they were unified, it would make a big difference. I agree with that part. And in your weird world, like I think I can see that happening. I mean, the reason why we've stayed in this two-party system is because people fall in line with one or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's like almost inevitable, not inevitable, do you feel are you like I don't want to say one of those people because I kind of see it on both sides. I don't know what to think about this, but I ask people this a lot. Do you feel like it's almost like so foundational to the Republican Party right now that like they have nothing to offer people of color? Like is it so fiscally heavy and not an emphasis on anything social that you feel like it doesn't bring these community, there's nothing positive that can come out of it for these communities? Because I'm not voting
I don't know
Republican.
how
I'm not going to
I,
vote for Trump. I'm
yeah,
just, yeah,
right. that's what I think the whole like Trump thing is just pure human like rights, you know, like not even Republican, Democrat, nothing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
it's just ridiculous. But
So be on Trump. So be on Trump then, because I agree. I agree.
yeah, yeah. I guess I'm biased. But I think people believe so much in the American dream and what that initially was, and they see the wealth of like Jeff Bezos and you know, even Trumps of the world and or of America, and that, I think that's part of it.
Hmm.
You know, I think that's part of why people believe in the Republican Party as much as they do. People that will, because of how like the wealth gaps are right now and they're expanding, will never even get to that point of wealth, but still believe in it. And it, along with like, you know, all the other like cultural and just those key things that you and I talked about that are just either red or blue.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
going in
yeah.
between.
Yeah. No in between for discussion. I can understand people being red or blue or
Yeah,
black or white, whatever, when it comes to voting, because you had to make a decision at some point, but at least
yeah.
don't be that before you actually get to vote. Have the discussion type of thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So closing in on this, I'm not gonna like kick you off in like a minute or nothing. But like what type of advice would you give to like people, I guess on either side when it comes to like having a conversation with somebody? Because you were pretty open minded. Like you were like the only person that responded back to that like thing without the perspective that I really wasn't trying to play devil's advocate. I'm like, I gotta have a conversation about this because I
Mhm.
had so many loops going through my head. I'm like, let me just see what other people think about this. But
Mhm.
everyone else responded to it in more of like a debate fashion. And like you
Mhm.
didn't. So what type of perspective do you bring even when you disagree with people or don't know what's, you know, entirely what they're trying to say, like to where you could have that type of perspective without being so offensive,
Yeah.
defensive? Do you have a certain, or is that just how you are by nature?
I think I learned it. You know, I think I learned that because there's, I don't know, a handful of people who I think agree with me to the T. I think generally the only way to collaborate and to communicate and to educate each other is to be empathetic. I've been talking about that a lot lately. You know, and a true empathy. You know, just I'm putting myself in your shoes and seeing where you come from and that kind of thing. And it's not exactly insulting to me, but I know that there are things that we can learn. So I think that just to be able to have a conversation, a true conversation, is that, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
respecting each other.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any
Yeah, but
advice for younger girls that might, because the reason I'm saying that is because my demographic
yeah,
on YouTube, because I'm going to put this on my YouTube as well, is like
yeah,
16 to like 34. So like there's a lot of
yeah,
it's like 70% of the people that
yeah,
watch me. So do you have any advice on just anything for young girls? Like there's no
yeah.
bounds for this. Anything you
Please,
want to say,
yeah,
go with it.
yeah. Well, I think the original point of our conversation, I don't even know if we addressed all the loops that you said you've
Yeah.
been going through with it because of the amount of topics that there are. But
Yeah.
um, I have to say, and I stand strong in that toxic masculinity exists, and that's why, you know, there have been moments where I am with a colleague, a male colleague, and I'll go up to a certain person and meet them. The first thing they say is like, "Oh, it's like, is this your wife? Is this your daughter? Is this your this or that?" And then it's like, "No, I'm their colleague. I'm, you know, whatever." And it's those small things that I think for women and girls makes an impact to their ego and their self-esteem and that kind of thing. And even, you know, to this day, you in a way have to fight for a seat at the table and your voice to be heard. And I'm an introvert. I'm naturally an introvert. Like I'm quiet and I'm much more the processing type of person. So I think like standing strong and like recognizing where the oppression affects you and like still continuing, whether it's like your education, whether it's your career, whether it's anything, even the relationships that you build, standing strong in like who you are and what that means for you is important. And it's way easier said than done. And, you know, a lot of mistakes along the way, but I think it's learning to stand strong in that. is important.
Nice. I want to say something to, I guess, compliment that idea off of a meme that I
Yeah.
saw to make sense of it. So there was a meme that it said that an example of toxic masculinity is Kanye running for president, undermining the qualifications for that position. So, and then it said, every female in America should apply for a job that they are not qualified for. And I want to touch on that
Yeah,
because all of you should. Because that was one thing where like
true.
everyone should. Just so my piece of advice for girls out there, just on that, something specific to say what you're saying, especially in a work thing, because I like that you brought that up. You should all apply for every single job that you want, regardless of whether you think you're qualified for it or not, because you're more competent than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if you're male or female.
Mm-hmm.
Most people that get jobs are not necessarily qualified for the job in general. Jobs are just very vague and ambiguous. Business is not some daunting thing
Mm-hmm.
that Hollywood and TV makes it out to be. It's just people learning stuff, getting
Mm-hmm.
good at like doing tasks and things like that, and then you go from there. So if you are a girl out there and you're getting out of college or you're in college or maybe you don't have a degree and you see these jobs in Indeed and you don't think you're qualified for them, it does not matter. I'm telling you right now, you'll learn, you'll figure it out. Apply for
Mm-hmm.
anything that you want. So
Yeah, even with college experience and that kind of thing, it's being in the situations and putting yourself, out there in a sense that, you'll learn exactly that. And having allies like you, I appreciate this conversation and you making that point. It's true.
thank you. I appreciate it. So that being said, thank you for coming on here with me and being like open to some of my weird random thoughts. Not necessarily, they're not the foundation of how I feel. They're just things that I guess they're more exercises of what I do to try to figure stuff out. But
Yeah.
is there anything else that you want to throw out there, like for yourself, like where you work, or just I don't know, anything that you're involved in that you feel like it's good for people to like know about?
Yeah. Speaking of that meme with Kanye and women applying and running for everything, it's true. I saw that and I was like, you know what? It's true. Not only Kanye, but feeling self-confident. So right now I'm exploring running for office locally, and I mentioned to you a little before, but I'm running for city council here in our little town of Riverbank. So I'll be having a website soon
Nice.
and social up. Rachel for Riverbank with the number 4, and yeah.
Nice. So all that stuff, we'll link it in the description, and you guys please like go click on the links and follow, and whatever there is for you guys to support on there, follow through with it. And if there's anything else, Rachel, throw it out there. But if not, we're gonna end up closing this thing up.
No, I feel like this begs for another conversation, so we'll leave it there.
No, definitely. Like I would love to have you on again. Like let people digest this,
I
and then in like
appreciate it.
however long, bring you on here again. All right.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it
All right,
was fun.
everybody. Like and subscribe and share with anybody that you feel like needs to hear this conversation. I appreciate all of you. And I don't ask you guys to sign up for my Patreon because I need the money, but it does help support these videos. And hopefully I can be a full-time content
Mm-hmm.
creator with all of your help. So just, throwing it out there. It's going to be linked in the description. Other than that, I will hear from you guys or see you guys or whatever you're watching it on. I will connect with you guys again sometime soon. Have a good one.